Ezra and Nehemiah, and welcome back everybody from our little time off. So I was not here to hear what Scott had to say about Chronicles. So was there anything that carries over from Chronicles that we need to touch upon? Or can I jump right in? Or you're just boiling over with excitement because Chronicles was just woohoo! All right. So it was, and it's August, so I see. Okay. There was for a while a presiding opinion that the chronicler, right? So it was Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and that's not the presiding opinion anymore. So cha with that, right? And I suppose maybe it was covered, or I'll cover now, Ezra and Nehemiah, one text. And clearly we have it as two texts. And the only real fun thing I find with Ezra is that there are two books in all of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures, whatever you'd prefer to call them, that aren't fully in Hebrew, and Ezra is one of them. So Ezra is partially in Aramaic, and the book of Daniel is also the other one, and so it's kind of like, ooh, that's fun. So apropos of nothing really, but ooh, that's fun. So there you go. All right. So at the end of the 6th century, the kingdom of Judah dismantled by the Babylonian Empire. Dun dun dun. Jerusalem and the Holy House, or be it, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly because Hebrew is not staying with me, Hamikdash, the Holy House, the temple, are destroyed. Thousands are exiled. But what we know is the return was able to come then in 538. The Babylonian Empire fell, the Persian Empire gained control, most of Mesopotamia actually, and most of the Middle East. Cyrus, that first ruler that's coming in, wanted to show tolerance, right? And so he issued the edict that takes up that first part of Ezra, and you hear about this. So allowing Jewish captives who wish to return. And so they do. We see the book of Ezra, or Ezra and Nehemiah. It's viewed as a completely historical book. Whatever that means, right? But it is a historical book in the Ketuvim. So, all right, there we go. And there are 3 stages, and there are 2 main issues. So we see it as this return, but not all of the Jewish folks who were in Mesopotamia were interested in returning to Zion, right? And those who came certainly wanted to rebuild, but they wanted to rebuild the ancient Israel. So there's nothing more exciting than, of course, rebuilding what used to be. So see the humor that I'm saying? All right, so you want to attempt to rebuild, and in your attempt to rebuild, you then also have to redefine who's really a true Israelite. And so you're setting those boundaries, and you see some of that, and that's also why we have this listing that you see, all of these folks. So, and as you're defining who is a true Israelite, then you're also returning to what are those true laws in the Torah. And you see that phrase that comes in, it shall be done as in the Torah. Right? And so you see that come in. So maybe I'm going to stop there because I have, as Scott and I had talked about, I have this way of teaching that tries to do this 30,000 foot view. But for me, this is where I think some of the really relevant, especially as a transitional pastor, but now I think, what do we have except transition? Because it's all very transitional time, and everything kind of moves fairly quickly now. Day by day, everything changes. So, when I joked about and said, let's rebuild what was, that for me, this is why I know Ezra and Nehemiah, and these are great books to know, because let's talk about the relevance of rebuilding what used to be. Or maybe we don't want to talk about it, but let's think about that relevance in terms of either the way we live our lives or church discussions or history, or just we want what was. And part of that stumbling block is, of course, we're going to come back and we're going to rebuild the temple. But remember what went into building the temple. Because if Solomon built the temple, what did Solomon have to do to build the temple? Enslave his people, and right? So if you're coming in with all of this fervent, let's do it the way it was done before, I'm thinking maybe you're not actually remembering what was done before, because you wouldn't want to come back filled with hope to be enslaved. So there's just this wonderful way of beginning to come into this book to talk about how relevant it is today. And maybe this is why we really don't want to be filming, but this is where we begin to break into everyday life, whether it's 1820 or 1920 or 2023. So we get very excited to do this little bit we remember from history. But I love this text because it talks about how human we always have been. So what did you pick up on, or what did you see as you started to break into this text? Or did you see any of those things as you started to read? Or was it really just like, why are they listing all of these people and why do I care? What did you see? Anything?
I like the first person.
Oh, yay!
Yeah.
Speaking for, okay, yeah. That is kind of a shift in narrative. Yeah. I love that.
I did not like sending away your wives and children.
Yeah. Right?
Like, it's one thing to say don't marry them, but another
To say, go. Yeah, right? That's when it gets like mean and personal, right? Yeah, so you intermarried, and to call that an abomination, right? And so,
Well, by today's standards, yes. But they were so convinced that they had sinned so badly
right.
that, and the only thing they understood at that time, in my mind, was that we have to start behaving the way our original covenant said.
Mm-hmm.
And the original covenant did say, remember Solomon, he married all those people and it didn't work out well for him.
Right.
So, yes, was this an extreme thing that they did, sending away the children and the wives? Instead of saying, okay, maybe we'll go, as going forward, let's do a better job of keeping the covenant. They were, it felt like they were really trying to give it their best shot, but doing it kind of badly in certain places, like that one. You know, they forgot about humanity, and instead were only thinking rules. And if there's anything to learn, I think in our day, it is, are there times when compassion and caring and humanity trumps those rules, you know, that we think we're supposed to follow. But we have the benefit of Jesus. They didn't.
Well, they still so those laws are still, so if you're going to be strictly adherent to the laws, right, for remember you were once, right? And so, all right, if you were sending away the wives and children, how are you caring for them? How are you providing for them, right? So, I mean, but there are those questions that if you have to make that clean start, if you have to, then okay, but what are the provisions? Where is your responsibility? So there are those pieces, and absolutely, it's like if you have sinned so badly, all right, you're still accountable, right? So yeah, and I can see it from that side. Absolutely. However, right, you have to provide, because if you just send them away.
Well, to me, it ranks up there with going in and possess the land. You know, again, there was no compassion for who already lived in the land, even though they came as aliens to the land, right? There's that blind spot that you kill all the people and take all their things, and that's okay. That's not any more okay than sending the wives and the children away from established relationships. You know? They seem to always miss that point in order to keep these rules, which they were also unable to do, as we are. You know, it's
absolutely
just a cycle over and over again.
Yep.
You know.
Absolutely.
So I have a question about not so much related to the relationships and it's the king of Persia, which is now present day Iran. Explain that to me. How, I mean, God is telling the king of Persia to send these people back. So, but was he then under God's rule, or I mean, since it became present day Iran now, it's a little, I'm just a little confused.
So we talked. So which? So any of the kings, all of the kings.
Well,
what do we?
King, Darius.
So
Is it Darius the first?
Cyrus.
Cyrus,
and then we get to Darius, and we get to yeah. So.
I know God wanted his people back, so he instructed the king of Persia to send them back.
That's how the story is told.
Right, but of course,
right?
I don't know.
So that is so. Again, completely historical, right? So you certainly gain political allies if you release those who were once captors and allow them to go back. And so there are some things seen in those ways. So I think I need to rehear your question. Meaning, are we seeing God at work through the rulers of Persia?
Right. God was at work because he was instructing him what to do. I mean, at least that's what it said in the.
But that is what it said.
What I read, yeah.
Yes, yes. That's going to be an interesting one for me to answer, because I can see God at work through anyone and anything, and not just because it turns out the way we want it to, right? So the script is going to be such that because they were released and allowed to go back home, return to Zion, that clearly God was at work in this. I'm not sure that that's the true heart of the question, but that is the heart of the narrative, that that God is more at work in those who are doing what we want them to do. And I'm not sure that we can use and abuse Scripture in that way. Right?
Right.
So let's open up the question more fully. So,
Are you talking about a political?
Yeah,
Because Persia is more Islamic today? I mean, Iran is
Right.
an Islamic
Right.
country. That's the jump you're trying to make?
right, I'm just kind
Yeah.
of wondering about.
I
at
think the
time,
Persian
it
Empire
probably
was very
Oh.
different than the empire is
than it
today.
is now.
okay.
Yeah.
So maybe
I was not making that historical leap. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was
no.
making a context,
Well, I
so
was
got
just
it.
wondering
Okay.
about
Yeah.
that, okay.
And like, what year is this?
538?
So there were tons of empires that took over in that time.
In that time
Yeah.
period, yeah.
Yeah, and they just kind of took all of it. Like
Well,
one
I-
took most of it, and then someone else came in and took most of it. So
Yeah,
it wasn't like
traded
it wasn't
places.
like there weren't boundaries. I think that like there are today, where it would be like this country or this area was once this and then became this. It's kind of like it was all just it was a little bit more fluid. I think the boundaries, and they just kind of took the areas that they could get based on where the populations were and where the things were that they needed, because everything kind of was based around, you know, where they could trade, where they could grow crops, where they could, you know, live.
But it was-
That's my understanding. I don't have a great
I'm
understanding
not
of
even sure
ancient history, but
Islam was around then, was it? I mean,
Well,
It's
that's
about
what- yeah.
600, isn't it?
was it 600?
it's about-
I was
yeah.
not remembering when
Missed
Muhammad.
it by that much. So, yeah.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
They were more likely
So we're
pagan,
just,
you know, yeah.
I have
Yeah, 600 AD.
oh, 600.
Oh.
Okay,
yes.
really late.
Oh, that
So
was
way,
really
way,
late.
way,
We're not-
way.
Way later,
Yeah.
okay.
on the history of time. So, because we're in BCE.
Exactly.
I have a historical, cultural question that kept coming up, like whenever they're talking about, you know, whether it was the intermarrying or, you know, any of this. So you had these people who were supposed to only worship God. And then you had all these people who were, you know, worshiping all these other gods. In their, I mean, I don't know if this is even something we can know, but in their minds, was it, there are all these other gods, but we're only allowed to worship the one God? Or was it, this is a bunch of, like, superstitious, they don't exist gods, and this is the you know, this is the one that we can worship? You know what I'm saying? Like, because they went back and forth so easily, like, okay, we're going to stick with it, it's going to be Yahweh all the way. And then it was like, oh, but, you know, there's the, whatever, the Baal and, you know, Asherah or whatever, there's all these other ones. So did they believe, because, you know, I'm like, is this a matter of, you know, going from, there's only this God, and these are all, like, superstitious, not real
No.
things that don't exist, or were they
No.
like, they exist, but we are not allowed to worship them?
So you will have no other gods before me is a clear indication that there are other gods. Right?
I don't know, I can hear that both ways.
Okay. Then,
So I guess I'm thinking in the
Okay.
context of them, they believed
Sure.
there were other gods, but they were not allowed to be put in a place of,
they're not in the same category.
okay.
So there are other gods, but there's one God. Right.
Okay.
The
So they
maker of-
believed that all of those other ones existed.
Sure.
Like they believed that they were there and they were doing their thing, but they weren't
Sure.
as powerful, they weren't as...
Right.
Okay.
But don't you think the world was pagan before before Yahweh came on the scene, that basically the culture was all pagan, and this was a new thing, was a transition, that God was building a new, this God appeared to one of them, namely Abraham or whatever.
Boy, is that a question to get me fired. I think y'all should answer that.
And isn't that the reason God took Abraham from the land of the Chaldeans to?
It's quite
It
possible.
seems,
It makes sense to my brain that if you are a largely pagan society, all different kinds of
Yes.
cultures, all mixed, all doing all kinds of things,
Yes.
and then something new comes along. The analogy that I would make would be from Jews to Christians, okay? This new thing came, and maybe they'd always heard about this one God thing.
Yeah.
So there are vestiges throughout Scripture of paganism. Many of the festivals, all the kinds
Absolutely.
of things that are celebrated were originally pagan festivals. Am I right on this?
You are.
Yeah.
Okay, and then,
Christmas.
so,
Spot
so
on.
that transition, you know, of course, is going to get mixed up sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I just didn't know if they
Yes.
walked away from it thinking we were totally wrong and those didn't exist and we only have our own,
Yeah.
or those ones aren't as important. We have this one, and I never
Well,
knew.
there is a lot of the "my God's better than your God" stuff in there.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it was like, was it my God's better than your God, or my God is really here and yours is an imaginary and you're all kind of loony? Kind of a
There might
thing.
be
both.
both.
I was
because
gonna say.
I think I've read it.
You don't have to separate
I'm not
those.
finding it now where somebody says those other gods who aren't anything. I
And Paul talked about them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Absolutely.
even in the Old
Not Hill.
Testament.
Yeah. So God's calling with the answer right now.
Oh, wouldn't that be? I wish it were.
So,
so much easier.
yeah. So that, and again, I think, speaking, you know, as we all can directly from the mouth of God, no, but trying to search and understand the best as our limited capacity can, I think it really is that way of understanding. When we say that these gods do exist, but they're lesser than, does that in fact nullify the fact that they're deities at all, and therefore make them illusion, right? Well, to some, I think the answer to that would be yes, right? To others, they'd say no, right? So if you have, okay, so if it's Thor, right? So a god we all are well aware of because, my gosh, we've watched the movie and nice. So, but a god in a very limited capacity, okay? So if you only are over a certain area, a certain realm, whereas our God, right, is over everything, and that includes thunder, and that includes, right? So really, what's the point of having to have many gods, right? A god or goddess of fertility, a god of thunder, a god of, you know, when you have one God that encompasses it all, right, that is the creator, right, the redeemer, the sustainer, when you have, so, and it really, in many ways, how do you compartmentalize those things? How do you begin to put all of that together? And each one of us processes that quite differently, I think. And so that question, I believe, would be interpreted then differently. And
Yeah, well, I was thinking more in the historical sense, like what the people were thinking, like how it would be so much easier to stray if you gave credence to those gods, but they just weren't as strong. Like, so if you thought, well, there really is the God that brings the chariot with the sun across the sky, but our God is better than that one, you know, it'd be like, okay, well, you know, but he's still bringing the sun, so that's awesome. As opposed to, there's not a chariot going across the sky, that's nonsense. It would seem like it would be harder to slip if you completely, if those other ones were completely in your mind, didn't exist. So I was trying to, as I'm reading it, and I'm like, seriously again? Like, you know, and I was like, but I wonder if, you know, so I was trying to, in the historical context of what they believed.
Sure.
How that fit in. That's why I was curious, is if it was you know, our God's bigger than yours, or the other one, that our God is the only one. Because I think that makes a difference in how people, like how they would behave and how things would happen. Like, I think that would make a difference.
Yeah. So our God as the only God, certainly valid and justifiable understanding for that, right? For the one true God, right? That understanding of who Yahweh is, right? The validation for those particular titles. But also and so I'm stuck again with it's a both and situation, because there's not a denial that these other gods, you shall have no other gods before me, right? The awareness that there's worship of other gods, right? But we have the true God. So, and yes, it is a slippery slope. It's a hard thing for us to get our head around. At the same token, I mean, I loved that, you know, the God that brings the sun, and so talking with folks who are in those deep and powerful times of grief, right? There are, if there is a God, just a little deity, right, that could take away the sad, you'd worship and cling to that God at times. Because this big picture God, right? And I'm not saying that's right. But I'm saying we still have those same issues today, right? And even when we worship and believe and hope, but that understanding that the world is complex and hard and messy, and life is the same, right? And so what you're asking, I think, is not just this long ago, how did this work, but so very real today. And how does this function today? So it's a profound question in this moment. So we may not call them Zeus and Apollo.
But
No, but it's real. It's very real, right? Welcome to Ezra and Nehemiah, but it's very real. So, and you're very brilliant.
I don't want to say that the Catholics worship idols or anything, but I mean the saints are.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
one's for this.
Oh,
this
for
one's
heaven's
for
sake.
that.
Yeah.
yeah.
No, yeah.
Well, I had a relative, a cousin's wife, who is Jehovah's Witness, and she was trying to talk me into becoming a Jehovah's Witness, and she said, "Oh, don't you know there are many gods?" And I was like, no, there is one God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's like,
I think that's a slippery slope. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Michelle, but it's what I was thinking of when you talk about that slippery slope, as there being only one true God.
Yeah.
That is how this Christianity has become so exclusionary. There's only one Jesus Christ and only one way for you to get to heaven.
Right.
You know, that is the slippery slope that happens. Rather than God is so much bigger than what we can possibly imagine, you know, and there'll
Right.
be many avenues that
Yeah.
in my theology that God can use to pull all God's children together. And all God's children means every human being on this earth. you
Yes.
know, So
Because I just think cultures make a difference in how the people interpret it.
exactly.
Where they, and we made up the religions, God didn't do that.
Yes.
He wanted us all to be one. So if I come out of a culture that, you know, believes in sacred cows and I really believe that.
Yeah. Everybody needs something
And
to
everybody
believe in.
else isn't right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, but I can't,
Yeah.
knowing what I know, they are okay. Buddha's got his own thing, and those people, nobody's bad. They just have a different outlook on things and the way they take it
And what their
wanna
belief
be.
system is.
That's not,
Yeah.
that's how because I can't believe God doesn't like this one and he likes that one and then he picks out this one. And of course, we're just the best in the whole thing.
Just us in this room, though, right?
Because we have the
Well,
one
no,
true God.
but those Methodists.
Oh, come on, just us in this room. Come on, come on.
No,
right.
that's
Yeah.
just crazy.
Isn't
I
it?
mean, and when I try to tell my sister, who's a kind of a Southern Baptist type, well, you're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
Okay. See you around. It's been real.
I'll
I
hold
mean,
the door.
You know, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
buy it. I can't buy that. I don't think that's our God. Our God is just, he, and yes, so cultures make, and these people came out, I don't have a problem with one God, but I wasn't raised with, that there's lots of gods.
Yes.
So that, to me, that's, can we move on now? That's okay, we got it. You know, I mean, and I think, but these people, this is what way they were raised. And the sun came, and there was a God, and there was a, you know, and it was just, so I think God knew that we weren't gonna all get that. It really, which is why he keeps forgiving us, because, you know, this is tough. I mean, I know.
If there's anything
is
that comes
tough.
out of this, man, we are forgiven and forgiven
That's
and
right.
forgiven and forgiven and forgiven over and over.
Yes.
Yep.
No, and we're still not learning.
Nope.
It's the same. Yeah.
Excellent. Right, so back into our texts. So, other little things that maybe you've picked out. I mean, one of the things I loved is they were, you know, making the lists of, you know, who came in and how many people here, and then even the piece right at the beginning as they're, yeah, and this many particular animals or whatever. And you know, as I'm going through, just what's the story in the story? It has to do with, for me as a, right, it all matters, it all counted, right? That, and I'm sure it all counted because now we know who to exclude, but it all counted because it all mattered, right? So these are the folks who are, and for me as I'm seeing it now, it's like, because it all counts, right? This matters. And, you know, we get it again in Nehemiah, and it's like, okay, because it still all counts, it all matters. And in the Nehemiah text, right, we have that first public reading, right, of Torah. And that's a tradition that still holds to today, right? And so, but you hear of that first as it's happening in this historical document. Okay, fine. At some point it did happen historically, and it is still happening, and we're still doing it. And you also then have the free will offering. First time, it's right in there. So just fun things to point out. And Lynn, I saw your hand. Yes, ma'am. I saw you do, I saw you do this. So no? Okay. So, but those are things that I just noticed as I was reading, and things to as trying to, and Jerubbaal, which is just a great name to say aloud. So other fun things to, Nebuchadnezzar is always fun to pronounce, but other things that maybe you saw or wanted to ask about, other, I know these are not the, we'll get to Ezra, which is always going to be a good one. That one we can get a lot more. There's story narrative in there. This doesn't have a lot of story narrative, but any other things you wanted to maybe find or pull out or?
When there was opposition, I
Yes.
thought that was interesting that they were able to go back and find the edict that
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Darius had written for
Yes.
the exiles.
Save your paperwork, people. Save your paperwork.
Amen.
Right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
This is probably apropos of nothing, but I just found it kind of curious and maybe a little bit of humor too, in that Nehemiah is described as the governor, and Ezra is described as the priest and the scribe,
Uh-huh.
but it's Nehemiah who's doing all the praying.
Yes.
The political figure's doing the praying, and the priest, not so much, but maybe he was, but it just, the way it was written, I thought was kind of cute.
Thank you for pointing that out. I love that. Yes. Yes.
And Nehemiah was the cup
He
holder.
was the governor, yeah.
He was the
Yeah,
cup
yeah.
holder.
Cup holder.
Yep, the cup holder.
Yes, yes.
He had to go back and do that for a little more.
Can I be released? Go do this. Let me tell you, I'm praying.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's right. The priest and the scribe not praying so much, but the cup holder. Yep. Good insight. Good insight. Yes, absolutely. Anything else? People who are going to watch this video are going to be like, but so it's okay. The only other thing I was really picking out had to do with just the ways in which they don't describe it this way, but the tears are celebratory and sad, right? So as Torah is read or as people gather, and you can hear as the description comes through, there is this joy, but there's also a sadness in remembering. And so there's a celebratory and a sad as the tears are being wept. And you can hear that in the text, and I know that from various worship experiences, and just that piece of living and knowing. And again, it's that way in which the text comes truly to life as you journey with the people who have that kind of hope and yet remembrance and yet desire for that future, and all of those things come together. And frequently they come together in just one moment in a service. And all of that, it all intermingles. And there it is. And sometimes you can cry those tears simultaneously in one person, or sometimes they're in many different people.
All the importance of each person was so. This one had this, and this one did that, and this one did this, and it was all very important. And it wasn't. That's the one that does everything. Other than, I mean, we all did it for God, but I mean, the people themselves. Now you have to do this, and we need you to do that, and they all had their own and were very important.
Absolutely.
I like the symbols and
Everyone
the symbols and
counted.
all the-
Uh-huh. Everyone
We had
counted.
musicians, and you know,
Uh-huh.
everybody had a point. He had something to do.
And they all contributed to the wall. to
Yes.
Rebuilding the wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the celebrations of the finishing of things, and that was all
Mm-hmm.
in just survival.
Yes.
Foods and everybody had to be fed, and everybody had to have their, you know,
Yep.
and
Mm-hmm.
we don't talk about that kind of stuff that much.
No, we don't. We don't.
It was like, that's why it's so rigid, because otherwise this is gonna fall apart.
Yep.
I'm sure we've already talked about this, but I've forgotten how long were the people gone from
Um,
taken away and when they come back?
okay.
80 years? Was that?
586. Yeah. Fell at 586, fell again at 70, and we returned, what did I just say, 538.
So only 48.
I would think it was about 40 years, something.
Yeah. So 2 generations. Yeah.
I was struck by how modern, like as I was reading it, I think because it was in the first person, it felt more like you were reading a story. But then like when they were sending the letters, that was like, and in my translation it said something, you just made that up out of your head. And I was like, this is so present day. Like they said this and they're doing this and this is what's happening and trying to like, I just was like, wow, this seems so much more modern than, most of what I'm reading. I'm like, this happens all the time.
It's pretty
Yes, it
dynamic,
does.
our scriptures are.
Yeah.
Yep. You have a better translation than I do, but yes, that's exactly what is going. Yep. So, in case this happens, let's make sure we're going to tattletale on them. Yep. That's wonderful. Yep. And so Lynn, while it was just that 2 generations, it certainly took longer than that because there was the delay of rebuilding and all of that. So the being away from the land was the 2 generations, but it took longer to rebuild. So it's not like, the temple was only down for 40 years. That's not the case. So, yeah.
So when was the temple completed?
That
was a long
that
time,
one
wasn't it?
that one I can't give you the exact date. So we went from Darius. Okay, hold on. Thank you for the notes. Okay, 539. All right, so Nehemiah is going to be in the 400s. So I'm going to be comfortable here saying, all right, temple halted. So 433. So we're going to edict to rebuild the temple, rediscovered, temple rebuilt. So 400, 404?
So I'm confused because then Herod, so that would be 3 temples. But they always talk about, yeah. So I'm kind of confused.
Well, the second temple came down in 70.
Yeah, Rome brought it down in 70.
But Herod the Great rebuilt a temple, it says 20 to 18 BCE.
So this would be,
That would be like the 3rd one then, right? So I'm kind of.
well, it would have been an adding on to of, so when you start here, they're starting with the walls around, right? Right, and then you need a place on which to sacrifice. And then you just keep going.
So
Right.
one was just like a remodel?
So I can get you information on what was built and exactly when it was built and
All right,
when
I have a
things were.
timeline in here.
Go.
Okay, so the exiles goes to Babylon in 586. First exiles returned 538. Temple completed 515. No?
That's what I have, just Googling it.
Temple
Oh.
completed?
Was dedicated in
515.
yeah.
What part of the
A
temple?
little known precursor to the grand structure called Herod's Temple.
Okay. Do they say what part of the temple?
No.
Okay. Well, then what are the next pieces?
On my timeline?
Yeah.
Xerxes becomes king of Persia 486. Artaxerxes becomes king of Persia 465. Ezra comes to Jerusalem 458. Nehemiah comes to Jerusalem and the wall completed 445. And then Nehemiah returns to Babylon 433. And then back to Jerusalem 432. So he only went back for a year, I guess.
All right, let me pull things from the Jewish Virtual Library and bring them to class. Okay? And that'll include some of the Herod stuff as well, okay? So that we have that information. Excellent. Anything else, folks? Anything else? Fun facts. Fun questions. All right. Well, I don't know whether I teach next or Scott teaches next. So, sorry about that. Wish I could tell you. But we do meet next Wednesday because our little time off has ended. So thank you for being here. Please.
What's
what
our
are we reading?
assignment?
Yeah, what's our
Because like the next one is only
Esther's
like
pretty short.
4
Yeah.
chapters or
Esther.
We already
something.
did Esther.
Just
didn't
Esther?
we?
No.
No, did you,
Oh, it
did you
was
do
Ruth
Esther?
that did that, because I knew I had.
Short,
Oh.
so I thought we'd
I
probably
was
get
like,
that.
it should be
super
Esther.
long.
Right.
I looked at it, I'm like, oh, I'm not doing both.
If it's not Esther, I don't know what you're
It is
doing. So yeah, I was going to say it should be Esther.
We should get a start on Job.
But it's gonna be Esther,
I think it's just Esther.
yeah.
Okay. Well, Job is
So-
really long,
Yeah.
so maybe we should
You're
work
gonna go ahead and
ahead.
start it earlier.
Not reading.
Yeah, start reading in advance. So
Yeah, it's like
That's why I
4
wondered
chapters.
if-
Yeah.
If there was a combination or what?
Psalms would have to be split up.
And then, yeah, do we know how we're doing Psalms? Because that'll be hard to read through in a week, I would think, because it's,
That's
150
150
yeah.
but Psalms is also a quick read. So
He said like 3
Couple of
weeks.
books.
yeah.
3 or 4 books, I forget now.
yeah, so yeah, I don't have any information on how many Psalms we're reading at a time.
Okay.
And did someone just say Esther only had 4 chapters?
10.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I was like, that's just one. Okay. So
And
Shorter
it's short.
than that.
You know what I mean?
Well,
The books themselves
It's a
are
great
short.
yeah.
story.
It's a short.
So it is. It's a wonderful story, and there's a lot behind it. So it's a great read. So how about Scott and I? So I just got back today. So Scott and I are going to take time to meet tomorrow. And so I will ask all of these questions and take copious notes, and then I will send things out to the class that will say, at least for the next several weeks, this is how things will proceed. This is how we will be doing the Psalms. This is how, because I also know we want to be able to do some of the prophets together. Like we're certainly not going to do Isaiah in one fell swoop. So thank you. Yes, right. So our major prophets, we won't just go boom here, read all of it. But our minor prophets will want to pair up. So so we'll put together a syllabus of that sort and get us through